week 11 of the fantasy football season. And here's a few kickers I look to get on the wire this week. The first guy, Greg Joseph of the Minnesota Vikings. Seen him tons of times this season, but he's still available in 56% of fantasy leagues. But Joseph, he's a guy that just goes out there and he puts up fantasy points. The last few weeks for him, week 6 at Carolina 9, week 8 versus Dallas 12, week 9 at Baltimore 7, and week 10 at the Chargers 10. So right here, this Minnesota Viking team, we know they put up a decent amount of points. Joseph, he's been very accurate in his first season here in Minnesota. And we know he's got a big boot as well. So right here, I know it's a tough matchup in week 11 versus the Green Bay Packers that give up the second least amount of fantasy points to kickers. But right here, he's on a good offense. He's going to get opportunities. And they're not scared to trot him out there for a 50-plus yarder. So right here, he's one of the better scorers in fantasy football at the kicker position. And he should be owned in more leagues. And I would give him a waiver wire ad this week. The next kicker is Graham Gano of the New York Giants. So Graham Gano, he's been pretty solid this season in fantasy football. And right now, coming off a bye week, he got dropped in 15% of fantasy leagues. So right now, he's available in 92% of fantasy leagues. And the Giants, they're an offense that don't score a lot of touchdowns, where they got to settle. And the last few games for Gano, week 7 versus Carolina, 15. Week 8 at Kansas City, 5. And week 9 versus the Raiders, 11 fantasy points. So week 11 at Tampa Bay, I could see more of the same here, where they're going to have to settle. And this Tampa Bay defense, they haven't been the same this season, like their championship run last year, where that defense was lights out towards the end of the season. We just saw Washington beat them and put up 29 points. And I think the New York Giants, they could have a decent ball game on the offensive side of things, where they could put up maybe 25 to 30 point range in this game, with Graham Gano getting a few field goal opportunities. So he's been one of the better kickers in fantasy football this season, and he's definitely a guy to get on the wire this week. The next kicker is Randy Bullock of the Tennessee Titans. So Randy Bullock, I've mentioned him as another option, as well as a guy to get off the waiver wire over the last few weeks. And right now, he's still available in 79% of fantasy leagues, and he's another guy on a good offense in Tennessee. And he's top 10 in scoring as well with the kicking position, is Randy Bullock. So the last few games for him, week 7 versus Kansas City, 11. Week 8 at Indianapolis, 12. Week 9 at the Rams, 4. And week 10 versus the Saints, 11. So right now, he scored double-digit fantasy points 4 out of the last 5 games. And like I mentioned, this Titan team, with the injuries to Julio and Derrick Henry, they're not going to score as many touchdowns as obviously they would with those guys in the lineup. But right here, Randy Bullock's been accurate. He's barely missed any field goals, and he's kicking long-range ones as well to get those double-digit fantasy points. So right now, he's got another great matchup in Week 11 versus Houston, where I expect him to most likely get the double digits once again. And he's definitely a kicker to get on the wire this week. The next kicker is Michael Badgley of the Indianapolis Colts. So in my opinion, Badgley, they should just keep him the rest of the season and either get rid of Rodrigo Blankenship or whatever the deal is with them in Indianapolis, because Badgley, he's been accurate. He's been very good this season and way better than he was in his Charger days, in my opinion. Week 8 versus Tennessee, 7 fantasy points. Week 9 versus the Jets, 9. Week 10 versus Jacksonville, 11. And Week 11, they verse a tough defense at the Buffalo Bills, where they might have to settle for a lot of field goals in that game. And the Colts here, their offense has definitely improved over the last few weeks here, winning 4 out of 5 games as well here. Michael Badgley's been a big part of it, with them having confidence in him to kick the field goals and take long attempts as well. So right here, he's available in 60% of fantasy leagues. I know a lot of fantasy owners went out there and added him in 15%, but it's still not enough in my opinion, and he should get added more on the wire this week. And the fifth and final kicker I look to get on the waiver wire this week, Zane Gonzalez of the Carolina Panthers. So Gonzalez somehow is available in 97% of fantasy leagues, but this guy, he does nothing but puts up points this season here. The last 2 out of 3 games, double-digit fantasy games, including 2 17-point games. So Week 8 at Atlanta, 17. Week 9 versus the Patriots, 7. And Week 10 at his former team, the Arizona Cardinals, 17 fantasy points. So Week 11, a great matchup versus the Washington football team that gives up the 8th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. And Zane Gonzalez spins accurate. We know he's got a good leg weight, could kick those 50-plus yarders. And this week, I think he has another good ball game and he should be added in way more fantasy leagues. So that's a few kickers I look to get on the waiver wire for Week 11 of the fantasy football season.